What if I told you that the wealthiest and wisest man who ever lived left behind 8 specific codes that guarantee success in any business, any industry, any era? Not theories, not suggestions, codes, principles so powerful that when you apply them, failure becomes almost impossible. King Solomon managed an economic empire worth $2.2 trillion in today's money. But here's what most people miss. He didn't just build wealth for himself. He trained farmers, merchants, builders, and administrators to prosper using these exact same principles. And he wrote them down in a book called Proverbs, specifically for people like you who want to succeed in business. The problem is, most Christians treat Proverbs like a religious devotional instead of what it actually is, the most comprehensive business success manual ever written. These aren't just spiritual platitudes. These are battle-tested strategies that have created wealth for 3,000 years and still work today, whether you're running a tech startup, a corner bakery, or a consulting practice. Today, I'm revealing the 8 secret codes Solomon used to guarantee business success. And I'm warning you right now, code number 3 is going to expose a lie that most believers tell themselves every single day, without realizing it's the exact reason their businesses keep failing. Stay until code number 8, because that's where everything comes together, and you'll understand why some Christians prosper, while others struggle, despite working just as hard. Drop your name and location in comments. Let me know who's ready to learn how Solomon built empires. How subscribe to Solomon Speaks, because we're about to go deeper than surface-level faith into the mechanics of biblical prosperity. Code number 1, honor. Proverbs 3:9-10 declares, "Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine." Notice the sequence. Honor first, then overflow. Most people want the overflow without the honor. That's not how God's economy works. Honor means you recognize that everything you have came from God and belongs to God. Your business isn't yours, it's His. You're the manager, not the owner. This isn't just spiritual talk, it's practical reality. When you operate with this mindset, you make different decisions. You don't cut corners because you're representing God's reputation, not just your own. You don't exploit customers because you're stewarding His resources, not building your empire. I know a woman named Grace from South Africa who started a small cleaning business. She came from absolute poverty. Her parents died of AIDS when she was young, and she raised her siblings alone. When she finally scraped together enough money to buy cleaning supplies and start her business, the first thing she did was tithe on her very first payment, even though she desperately needed that money for food. She honored God before herself. Within 2 years, Grace had 12 employees and contracts with major office buildings across Johannesburg. She didn't get there through manipulation or luck. She got there through honor. Proverbs 14:31 says, "Whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God." Grace paid her employees more than minimum wage even when she couldn't afford it, because she honored God by honoring His image bearers. And God honored her back by filling her barns to overflowing. The biblical example is Joseph in Potiphar's house. Genesis 39:2-3 records, "The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did." Joseph honored God in a pagan household, working for a pagan master, and God blessed him so obviously that even the pagan noticed. Code number 2, generosity. Proverbs 11:24-25 teaches, "One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. And a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." This is the counterintuitive code that separates those who build sustainable wealth from those who chase it and never catch it. Most business owners operate from scarcity. Squeeze every penny, pay employees minimum, charge maximum, give minimum. They think generosity is the enemy of profit. Solomon says the opposite is true. Generosity creates a vacuum that God fills with more than you gave away. It's not karma, it's divine design. There's a man named Thomas in rural England who inherited a struggling dairy farm. His father had run it into debt trying to maximize every pound of profit, cutting costs everywhere, treating workers poorly, selling low-quality milk for high prices. When Thomas took over, he did something radical. He started paying his farmhands 20% above market rate. He invested in better feed for his cows, even though it cost more. He sold his milk for less than competitors, but with higher quality. Everyone said he was insane. Within 3 years, Thomas had the most loyal workforce in the county. His cows produced 30% more milk than average, and grocery stores were specifically requesting his dairy products because customers noticed the quality difference. Proverbs 22:9 says, "The generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor." Thomas refreshed others, and he was refreshed with prosperity his father never saw. The biblical example is the widow of Zarephath in 1 Kings 17. During famine, Elijah asked her for bread, which she had only enough flour and oil for one last meal for herself and her son before they would starve. Elijah said, "Give me the first portion." She did, and 1 Kings 17:16 records, "For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord." Her generosity and scarcity triggered supernatural provision. God doesn't just match generosity, He multiplies it. Code number 3, true trust in God, not false security. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Proverbs 3:5-6 commands, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Most Christians quote this verse. Few actually live it in business. So the false belief sounds like this: I trust God. But watch what happens when crisis hits. Sales drop. A major client leaves. Cash flow dries up. Suddenly that trust evaporates into panic, desperation, cutting ethical corners, making fear-based decisions, or worse, just quitting entirely. That wasn't trust. That was false security masquerading as faith. True trust in God means you understand something most people don't. God allows adversity specifically to teach you to depend on Him instead of your own cleverness. Deuteronomy 8:2 says, "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart." Your business struggles aren't God abandoning you. They're God testing whether you will cling to Him or to your own strategies. And I know a man named David from Australia who built a construction business. Everything was going perfectly until the 2008 financial crisis hit. His contracts evaporated overnight. He went from employing 20 people to struggling to pay his own mortgage. Most contractors in his area went bankrupt or compromised on safety to get any work they could. David did something different. Instead of panicking, he spent 2 hours every morning praying and reading Proverbs before he made a single business decision. When a sketchy developer offered him a huge contract to cut corners on building codes, David said no, even though he desperately needed the money. He trusted God to provide another way. 3 months later, a government infrastructure project opened up specifically for contractors with perfect safety records. David got the contract, and within a year, he had rebuilt his business bigger than before. 2 Chronicles 20:20 says, "Have faith in the Lord your God, and you will be upheld. Have faith in His prophets, and you will be successful." David's trust in adversity positioned him for God's provision. The biblical example is Job. He lost everything: his wealth, his children, his health. His response in Job 13:15, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." That's not fake positivity. That's radical trust. And Job 42:10 records, after Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. True trust endures the fire and comes out refined. If you're going through difficulty in any area of your life right now, whether it's financial struggles, business failure, family challenges, health issues, or anything else, let us know in the comments. Say, "I need prayer for," and tell us your situation. We're a community, and we believe in standing together. We read every comment, and we pray for every request. You're not alone in this, and God hasn't forgotten you. Code number 4, wisdom and counsel. Proverbs 15:22 warns, "Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed." Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, said he needed multiple advisors. And you think you don't? This code destroys the myth of the lone genius entrepreneur who figures everything out themselves. Wisdom means you recognize you don't know everything. Counsel means you actively seek people who know what you don't. Most businesses fail not from bad ideas, but from blind spots the owner couldn't see because they refused to ask for help. Pride kills more businesses than incompetence ever will. The biblical example is Daniel. Daniel 1:17 says, "To these 4 young men God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds." Notice it says God gave knowledge. Daniel didn't assume he already knew everything. When King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, Daniel 2:18 records that Daniel urged his friends to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery. Daniel sought counsel. He brought in advisors. He didn't try to interpret the dream alone. The result, Daniel 2:48. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Counsel led to unprecedented success. There's a woman named Patricia from Jamaica who moved to Toronto with $300 and a dream to open a Caribbean restaurant. She knew how to cook, but knew nothing about business permits, accounting, marketing, or managing employees. Instead of pretending she knew, she found a retired restaurant owner at her church and asked him to mentor her. He taught her everything: how to read a P&L statement, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to handle difficult employees, how to market without a big budget. Patricia's restaurant is now one of the most successful Caribbean spots in Toronto, with lines out the door every weekend. Proverbs 19:20 says, "Listen to advice and accept discipline, and at the end you will be counted among the wise." Patricia listened, and she prospered. Code number 5, prudence and planning. Proverbs 21:5 declares, "The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty." This code destroys the lazy theology that says, just have faith and God will handle everything. No, God expects you to plan, organize, execute with excellence, and then He blesses your diligent work. Prudence means you don't do things haphazardly and then blame God when they fail. Luke 14:28-30 gives the parable of the tower. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, "This person began to build and wasn't able to finish." Jesus himself taught that planning matters. You don't start a business on a whim and pray God fixes your lack of preparation. You research the market, create a business plan, understand your costs, project your revenue, identify your risks, and then you move forward asking God to bless your well-laid plans. I know a man named Samuel from Nigeria who moved to London to start an import-export business. He didn't just jump in. He spent 6 months researching shipping costs, customs regulations, demand for African products in the UK, profit margins, and potential suppliers. He created detailed spreadsheets projecting 3 years of cash flow. His friends from church said he was overthinking it and should just trust God. Samuel trusted God by being prudent. Proverbs 27:23 says, "Be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds." Samuel knew his numbers. When he finally launched, he had already solved problems most importers don't discover until they're bankrupt. His business is now generating over £200,000 annually because he planned like success was guaranteed, but prepared like failure was possible. The biblical example is Joseph, again, where Genesis 41:33-36 shows. Joseph didn't just tell Pharaoh, "Pray about the famine." He gave a detailed plan. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. Joseph had a system, a structure, a plan. God bless the plan. Drop your name and where you're watching from in the comments. Let me know who's part of this community learning biblical business principles. And hit subscribe because we're building a movement of believers who honor God with excellence, not excuses. Through code number 6, understanding your calling. Proverbs 16:3 instructs, "Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans." Most Christians think serving God means preaching, missions, or church ministry. They miss the truth that God calls people to business just as much as He calls people to pulpits. Your business is your ministry, if you do it for God's glory. Daniel is the ultimate example. He wasn't a priest or prophet by profession. He was a government administrator and business consultant to kings. Daniel 6:3 records, "Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom." Daniel served God through excellence in secular business. Colossians 3:23-24 says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward." It is the Lord Christ you are serving. You're not just running a bakery, you're serving Christ through baking. You're not just managing construction projects, you're building for God's glory. There's a man named Robert from Scotland who felt called to start a landscaping business. His family thought he was wasting his potential because he had a theology degree. They expected him to pastor a church, but Robert knew God called him to transform communities through beauty and creation care. He built his landscaping business on biblical principles, treating employees with dignity, pricing fairly, using sustainable practices, tithing his profits, and praying over every project. 10 years later, Robert employs 30 people, has restored parks in underprivileged neighborhoods for free, and has led 7 employees to Christ through his testimony of faith in business. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God." Your calling isn't less spiritual because it makes money. It's more powerful because you're demonstrating God's kingdom in the marketplace where most people spend most of their lives. Lydia in Acts 16 was a dealer in purple cloth, a businesswoman, and she hosted the early church in her home. Her business funded ministry. Your business can too. Word code number 7, constancy and perseverance. Proverbs 24:16 declares, "For though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again, but the wicked stumble when calamity strikes." Success in business isn't about never falling. It's about rising every single time you fall. Constancy means you don't quit when it gets hard. You don't change direction every time you hit resistance. Most failed businesses didn't fail because the idea was bad. They failed because the owner gave up too soon, changed strategies too often, or lost faith in the process. God rarely does anything overnight. There's always a process. Genesis 2:15 shows God put Adam in the garden to work it and take care of it. Work was always part of the plan. I know a woman named Ruth from Canada who started a home bakery. The first year, she barely broke even. Second year, she lost money. Her family told her to quit and get a real job. But Ruth felt God told her to persevere. She kept waking up at 4 a.m. to bake. She kept perfecting recipes. She kept showing up at farmers markets even when sales were slow. Year 3, a local coffee shop chain discovered her pastries and placed a massive order. Year 4, she opened her first storefront. Year 5, she had 3 locations. Galatians 6:9 says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Ruth reaped her harvest because she didn't give up during the years of planting and watering. The biblical example is Noah. Genesis 6:14 records God telling Noah to build an ark. It took Noah approximately 100 years to build it. 100 years of mockery, doubt, and physical labor with no visible results. But Genesis 6:22 says, Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Constancy, obedience, perseverance. And when the flood came, his constancy saved his entire family. Write this declaration in the comments. I will persevere in the calling God gave me. Say it publicly. Proverbs 18:21 says the tongue has power of life and death. Speak perseverance and constancy over your business right now. Declare that you won't quit when it gets hard. Code number 8, faith that moves mountains. Hebrews 11:6 declares, and without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. This is the final code, the one that activates all the others. You cannot experience God's supernatural provision in business while operating in fear, complaining, and unbelief. Faith isn't pretending problems don't exist. Faith is recognizing that God is bigger than your problems. You can't live in constant fear about money and expect God to bless your business. You can't complain about the economy, the market, the competition, and then wonder why nothing changes. Your words reveal your faith or lack of it. James 1:6-8 warns, but when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Faith means you pray, you consecrate your day to God, you ask for His favor, and then you move forward believing He will do what He promised. There's a man named James from South London who started a car repair shop with almost nothing. He had been in prison, had a criminal record, couldn't get a job anywhere. He prayed and asked God for one chance. The church helped him lease a small garage. Every single morning before opening, James prayed over his shop, anointed the tools, and asked God to send customers. The first months were brutal. Almost no customers. Bills piling up, fear screaming at him to quit. But James refused to operate in fear. He refused to complain. He thanked God every day for the business even when there was no business. Philippians 4:6-7 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Within a year, James had more customers than he could handle. Within 3 years, he opened a second location. Within 5 years, he was teaching other ex-offenders how to start businesses. His faith moved mountains that logic said were immovable. The biblical example is Abraham. Romans 4:18-21 says, Against all hope, Abraham in hope believed, and so became the father of many nations, just as it had been said to him. Without weakening in his faith, he faced the fact that his body was as good as dead. Yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God, not being fully persuaded that God had power to do what he had promised. Abraham faced impossible circumstances. He chose faith. God honored that faith with nations descending from him. Your business circumstances might look impossible. Choose faith anyway. These 8 codes aren't suggestions. They're the operating system for biblical prosperity, honor, generosity, true trust in God, wisdom and counsel, prudence and planning, understanding your calling, constancy and perseverance, and faith that refuses to quit. Solomon used these codes to build an empire. Daniel used them to prosper in a pagan nation. Lydia used them to build a successful business in the Roman Empire. And thousands of ordinary people whose names we don't know have used these same codes for 3,000 years to prosper in every imaginable industry and economy. And you don't need to be smarter than everyone else. You don't need more capital. You don't need better connections. You need to align your business with the principles the Creator of the universe designed to produce prosperity. When you do, success isn't just probable. It's guaranteed. Not overnight, not without challenges, but guaranteed over the long term. Psalm 37:4 promises, "Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." Notice it doesn't say He'll give you what you want. It says He'll give you what your heart desires when your delight is in Him. When your business is about glorifying God, serving people, and operating with integrity, the desires of your heart align with God's will. And when they align, nothing can stop what He's ordained. Subscribe to Solomon Speaks. Turn on notifications. Share this with someone who needs biblical wisdom for their business. And remember, these codes worked 3,000 years ago. They work today. They'll work tomorrow. Not because they're trendy, but because they're true. May God bless your business, your finances, your family, and your future. May everything you build bring glory to His name. And may you prosper not just financially, but in every area of life as you honor Him with your work.